Welcome to the Plunge with Derek Holser. As we continue the series, Tolkien's Greatest Characters, I am thrilled to have with me a good friend, Taylor Crandall. Taylor is thoughtful, insightful, and she carries an air about her that resonates with the type of enduring, noble, and virtuous characters that we all love in Tolkien's world. I'm so glad you tuned in. I'm thankful that you've joined us, and I'm extra thankful to Taylor for being willing to take the plunge. Let's dive in. Joining me today is an amazing young woman, Taylor Crandall, a good friend of our families. Our families are buddies. We've known each other now for probably 4 or 5 years. And Taylor's on Bainbridge Island, Washington, where I reside. And I'm just so glad you could join me, Taylor, and talk about one of your favorite characters and one of your favorite authors. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Derek. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here talking about Tolkien with you today. My favorite,
Oh,
one
thank
of my
you.
favorite things.
I remember a few years back, we were joining your family for dinner at your parents' place, and the topic of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien came up, and it was very evident to me that you were unbelievably knowledgeable and deeply passionate about this. So I couldn't think of a better guest to have on for this series. But before we jump into your passion, just tell us a little bit about your life and what you're up to these days.
Well, right now I'm a student. I'm studying psychology. I would love to go into some kind of counseling or therapy down the road, but there's a lot of school to be training before that. And at the very beginning, I graduated high school about 8.5, and I had the opportunity to do a discipleship training school with a mission organization called YWAM, Youth with a Mission. And the first 3 months of that, we got to do a really condensed kind of Bible school, also focusing on discipleship a lot. And then we did a 2-month outreach somewhere in Europe. And my team got to go to England. And that, oh my goodness, I think it's been something throughout my life where also, deeply related to Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, where I've longed to go to England and didn't really think that would be a possibility or that there was anything there. But we went, and it was just like Tolkien wrote about. And, and I think those are all the biggest things in my life that have kind of this direction. I would love to do kind of counseling something in England one day among
Lovely.
great literary
When, say that again?
among great literary minds.
Yes. When you were over there, did you have the opportunity to visit Oxford or the famous pub, the Eagle and Child?
We were so close. We were 40-minute drive. We were volunteering like all day, every day though, and we had one team day off. You had to leave the city with one other person at least. And unfortunately, nobody else shared that same enthusiasm. But one day, I know, but
To,
we
to,
were in
to be
Oxford.
that close.
I know. We were in Oxfordshire for like a tiny bit, and we went to this beautiful bluebell wood. And throughout the rest of our time where we were on the like by the border of Oxfordshire and Wiltshire. Oh my goodness. You know how Tolkien says about Tom Bombadil, how he kind of represented in a way. I didn't listen to the episode on Tom Bombadil. I'm sure this might have been brought up, but the vanishing spirit of Oxfordshire made so much sense while being just in that area. So
Hmm. Well, here's to you returning and enjoying it and immersing yourself in that world that I know you've longed to be a part of for, I guess, most of your life. Tell us when that first spark was lit with Mr. Tolkien.
well, first, I think my first encounter with him was definitely when, well, it wasn't really directly with him. It was with the Peter Jackson movies. My dad would watch them and I would come in and for the parts that weren't very scary, but then I would also kind of stay for some of the scarier parts too. And those gave me terrible nightmares. I don't know why I wanted to keep watching them, but I did. And I didn't have the attention span to watch them either. So they ended up being this thing in the background that I was like, man, I know there's something really cool and epic here, but I can't, I can't go there yet. And then Dad tried to read The Hobbit to us. And I was also really inquisitive and distracted. I kept on looking at the binding of the book and saying, why does it Tolkien? Like, Tolkien is a token. It's not a name. Like what it did. And then I tried to read The Hobbit later. It was great. A friend let me The Lord of the Rings. And I think I finished those when I was 11. That was the spark of everything else. The Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales. I wasn't allowed to read the history of Middle Earth, those volumes, because my parents said, you need to read other things and talk about other things. So I read Sherlock Holmes instead. But
Wow. So love at first sight in a way, very impressionable when you were little.
yep,
Um,
totally.
wow. And ambitious. Reading the Silmarillion as a teenager, there not many people have accomplished that feat. So congratulations.
Thanks. Well, like when there's something in a story and you just know that there are layers and layers underneath it, that's will. Okay, actually, this has a great deal to do. I think everything that we're going to be talking about in this conversation is coming from a kind of childhood lens, that present and how I think of the world today and how I see it. And so how I see Tolkien and his work and all connected. Um, I always wanted, like so many other kids, for the stories that I would read to be true. And, um, you know, there would be these mantles and stories that you would read about. Like a really small example is one where there's this girl who's about my age when I was reading. I'm like 10 or something. And she goes to the house of this admiral, and it's a really huge affair because it means something significant that it doesn't mean anymore. It does in a way, but I'm not part of that world. My parents and I went to the house of an admiral for dinner as well, and I dressed up as nice as I could. And it was the most normal dinner we've ever had, and really nice. They were great people, but at the same time, I was like, okay, this isn't like in the story, this feels just regular and ordinary. And then you read Narnia, and Lewis says, once a king or queen of Narnia, always a king or queen. I thought, oh man, but kings and queens nowadays aren't even really kings and queens, thinking about, Queen Elizabeth. And I was heartbroken. So then reading Tolkien, it just felt like the most real thing that went along with something that I knew there was a layer of in our world, but he didn't spell it out quite like Lewis did.
Yeah. Tolkien is remarkable in that ability to give you a peek behind the curtain that makes you want to go deeper and further. And and I love that the character you've chosen is one from the origins, as it were. And so I would love for you to tell us who you chose and why.
Right. I chose Eärendil. You can see his name lots of different ways. Turns out they're not all incorrect because Tolkien had so many different spellings of it, and there's the Anglo-Saxon root word, and that's a whole thing. But I chose Eärendil because I didn't want to choose Turin, was one of the main reasons, actually. Um, I've heard so much about Turin, and none of those thoughts would be. But Eärendil, he loves the sea. He is a mariner. And when I was a kid, I read this poem about the sea. It's called Sea Fever by John Masefield. I thought that sounded really cool. And then we've always lived by the water. So you go out to the water and you, man, oh, this place leads to all other places. Yeah, that was awesome. And then as you read through the unfinished tales of Numenor, you also get to hear so much about that nation, that country, and how they view the sea, the link that I guess I'm just as fascinated by the sea as maybe a Numenorean might be. Useful. Yeah.
So you find a kindred spirit there with those people, and I can understand that, appreciate that. Though I grew up landlocked, my wife grew up in the same area as you did, and she was into sailing. She actually sailed professionally for a period.
That is aw
And what's that?
that is awesome. I don't think
Yeah,
I noticed that.
yeah. She doesn't talk about it much, but she actually won a major award for a race in Hawaii. She was, well, twice did the Vic Maui, which is a 2 week race across the Pacific from Victoria to Hawaii. And she was selected in 1998 as part of the all women's America True team and trained in New Zealand before her body couldn't keep up with the demands of that. But she was quite the sailor. So she might join you in Eärendil, and you guys can go off into the wherever you go, because the ocean takes you wherever you'd like to chart your course. Um, you know, up till now, everyone in the series has spoken of characters that were introduced either in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. And I would love to, and you're not, I think we have one or two other more ancient lore, Silmarillion figures to come. But I would love to know for you, particularly, I know you're an old soul because I know you, but you're still quite young. And I'm curious as to how the Silmarillion captivated and kept you interested as you read it.
That is a really fair question. No idea. I think I think it goes back to that thing as a kid. There was just this awareness that there's something older and more real than anything. And I was raised in a Christian home, so I've had a relationship with Jesus as long as I can remember. But that didn't really like those two ideas didn't really connect for me until much later. When I was like, oh, this is actually what this is. This is what, again in Narnia, because when Aslan says, you have to get to know me in your own world as you've gotten to know me here. But I think with other mythologies that we were introduced to, like Greek, Roman, Norse mythologies, they all seem kind of fake. The gods were so self-centered. There was no real um, purpose, no real true morality. Everything was a reflection of man. And what Tolkien wrote was a reflection of, the Christian God and his son and his spirit and his order of creation, which rang true for what I had a sense of as a child. So I think that kind of feeling of and knowledge of that this is a real reflection of reality kept me engaged and wanting to know the intricate um, connections between all of the people, all of the events. Because oh, and when you're younger, you only get to experience so much. At least if you live a life like I did, then you know you see your friends and you go to school and you do your chores, and that's pretty much it. But when you have an opportunity, like so much of us who have gotten to read and foster a love of reading when we're younger, that's how we live our adventures. And we get to kind of decide, I want these traits when I'm older. And when you see it's such a vast difference between, you know, um, because I love these other stories too, like these little prim and proper domestic stories of, these neighborhood kids or tea times and dances and things. I love that still, but it really is on a whole. completely different of a scale than when you're looking at these great feats that impact the whole tide of.
Hmm. You raise a fascinating point about the mythology, the Greeks, the Romans, the Norse, that I think is a keen insight that they are a reflection of the limitations of humanity, but with more power, right? The whether it be the vices or the virtues, it is simply a magnification of our own um, unchecked spirits.
Right.
Yeah. Huh.
And where
It's
do you
good.
get with that? Like, yeah,
Right.
you just keep on looking at your humanity. But and the thing with Tolkien is that all of his great characters are always looking at themselves, and then they get to point others to the direction of something greater than them, which is often portrayed as hope. In broader sense, it's a Louboutin. There's everyone over there is always looking to something greater than themselves as he's writing. So I think, yeah, it just goes along
Yeah.
very nicely with.
That's perfect because I think in an earlier series we did on Owen Barfield, who was one of the Inklings, he talks a lot about poetic. I mean, he has a book entitled Poetic Diction, but in essence, his communication and his effect on Tolkien with respect to language and its origins, I think was meaningful, and Tolkien, mentioned that. But I also think that one of the things that is so compelling is the poetry of that Tolkien weaves in, and the ability of poetry, just as you described the characters in Middle Earth in terms of that sort of God relationship, that higher calling. Poetry in a lot of ways it bypasses the mind and gets right to the heart in a way that other types of communication does not. And so I believe you have a poem or two from a quite a special book, and I'd love for you to tell us about the book and read those to us.
Thank you. So this is my great
Yeah.
grandma's book. Loved it. She wrote this Irish blessing in the back. It's full of her handwritings, and the pages are falling out. It's wonderful. I have to take it with me. But one of the reasons that I chose Eärendil for my character is because, which I could have mentioned earlier, but I forgot about it in a moment. I don't know if you're familiar with the poem A Song of Life by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
It doesn't come to mind, but maybe if I heard a few lines.
It's got quite a few stanzas, but the last ones stuck in my mind as I thought of Eärendil. So he says, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time, footprints that perhaps another, sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us be then up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. So,
That's beautiful, and that I will say that describes Taylor Crandall. And I know that that last line is the hardest part,
yep,
right?
learn to labor and learn to wait. But with a heart for any fate, right?
Right,
It's got
right.
to do with the whole person, the whole mindset. But I thought of Eärendil because he, well, it has that clear imagery of sailing and having a shipwreck, which Eärendil doesn't have. Well, in some versions, he does have that, but I'm not very familiar with those versions, and they're not the official ones that Christopher Tolkien chose. So they're not going to be a part of this discussion very much. But the idea that great men, leave behind something for others to look upon, to take courage, have hope, knowing that someone else has been there before with a purpose, even if, and you might know what that is and you might not, but we're all as mankind trying to pursue, hopefully, this great goodness and a life, because we're made to reflect and to pursue and live in a relationship with God. But, if we're not aware of that and actively doing that, then we're still living lives that are kind of seeking and searching in some way, trying to fill that in with other things. So this reminded me of Eärendil because he is quite literally a symbol of hope in the Lord of the Rings, as well as a great man who is referenced again and again um, in The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm not sure about The Hobbit, but
So, did you have another poem or?
Ed, sorry.
Awesome. No, that's great. Never apologize for enjoying great work.
So good somewhere. This one is called Sea Fever by John Masefield, which I mentioned before. And how I came across that is I was invited to a poetry tea party when I was 8, I think. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a chance for me to participate in something that has been going on for, thousands of years, this great poetry. And everyone showed up and read Silverstein. And, you know, I got to appreciate that as well. But there was just another contrast of there is something out there, like when you're on the edge of the sea. There's something. Anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I will say, since you brought it up, one of my top 10 all-time books is The Giving Tree by Shell. And I think that's the closest he came to producing the kinds of transcendent conception of love that draws us all and is a big cornerstone, obviously, of Tolkien's work. So anyway,
Wow, that is
please
really
continue.
cool. Thank you. To give that another read. It's very, really pleasant. All right, so this is Sea Fever by John Masefield. He said, I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind song and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I must go down to the seas again, the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way where the wind is like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trip's over.
Well done. Lovely reading and a lovely poem. What's your favorite line in there or stanza?
Well, I, I've gone through phases of liking them all. Okay. I love the part where he talks about how the wind is like a whetted knife. And I know it's just such a short part of the sea. I'm not a sailor. I've read things and I've watched things on TV and I have dreamt, but I know that it is not a safe, sweet place where everything is just relaxed and you get to enjoy your life and your comfort. You get to have instead you know, the raw storms and the spray and these waves, and you have to learn how to master that and navigate it. But there are times when you are stuck and you have no control over like where you can actually go. You have to sit in the storm for a little bit and try to stay afloat. And that's it. I don't know. I think it speaks to this kind of experience in life that I have had a small taste of, but it not a full experience of yet. But I will because that comes for everyone. Hans Christian Andersen says that sorrow is the last pearl in a string of other blessings. And yay. But I think that it's still a profound picture of, you know, while there's this great glory that we get to inherit, seek, and find peace in, we also have to face the great darkness and danger as well.
Right, right. You don't get to have an adventure without venturing into unknown and often dangerous places. And I think the thought that comes to mind, although it's not a direct corollary with your description of the sea, is that, that famous line that Aslan is a lion. It's not a tame lion. And the sea reflects some of that. Obviously, it's not something that's actually saving us, but it is providing everything that is necessary for the ecosystem of this planet to function. And it also harkens, as you describe, again, growing up in a place I grew up in Kentucky, so there's no ocean anywhere close to where I grew up. And it has been fascinating to me, actually. This isn't supposed to be about me, but why not? Um, I I left um, high school. I left Kentucky and went to college in Clearwater, Florida, which is the Gulf of Mexico, Clearwater Beach, and then lived in Virginia Beach on the Atlantic Ocean, and now live. I also lived in California in the Pacific Central Coast, and now live in Washington on Bainbridge Island, looking out at Puget Sound every day. And so it's funny because so much of how we encounter the world, the anticipation or the emotion connected to it, there's a depth when it is part of your childhood that I don't believe, at least for me, I've not experienced to the degree that you or Leah or others who grew up along the water. It's such a primordial sensation for you all. And that has always fascinated me. And yeah, anyway, that has nothing to do with Eärendil, but
Well,
nonetheless.
really? Because, his father, Tuor, was called by the seahorns of Ummo, and he had to follow them. And Eärendil longed for the sea. He wanted to find Tuor. That was his whole thing, And then the whole thing of all the most of the Numenorians after that. So I think it's quite related.
Well, then tell me his whole thing,
His whole
because
thing
I'm
about
you said his whole thing. Whatever you want to tell me about his virtues, his heritage, his leadership, his glory, it's all you, Taylor, as though I have never heard of this character in my life.
oh dear, that might call for a lot of background. So,
I
Eärendil.
think I think you're up to the challenge.
All right, let's go then. Eärendil he's the son of Tuor and Eärendil. Eärendil is an elven princess who from the kingdom of Gondolin. And if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, like the movies at all, and you might hear that Gondor is really similar to Gondolin. It's has that similar root word, and when you look at a lot of the architecture that is described in the books and portrayed in the Peter Jackson films, Gondor is meant to kind of reflect a lot of what Gondolin was. It was this stronghold that harbored this king Turgon. He was a great elvish lord, and he had a daughter named Eärendil who married Tuor, and Tuor is one of the greatest men who ever lived in a Tolkien's legendarium. Among him were Beren, of course, and Tuor, and they were from Beren was from the house of Beor, and Tuor and Turin were from the house of Hador. I think it's been a little bit since I've read all about them. I used to read a lot about Turin and Tuor, and their stories are tragedies. So it's a little bit hard to read them continually. But so Tuor and Adriel marry, and that's where we get Eärendil. And like I mentioned earlier, Tuor is already a mariner, and he gets called by Umo, who is the Vala, who are kind of like a lesser god, angelic type of being in Tolkien's Legendarium, because you have the one creator god, Iluvatar or Eru, and he has all of these kind of lesser spirits, but also that which contributed in the creation of Arda, which is the created world. So, Ulmo, the one who is related, most connected to the sea and water and everything, calls Tuor and other elves to towards Valinor. They may not always get there. Like, we don't know what happened to Tuor ultimately. We know that he sailed and Eärendil went after him, but we don't know how exactly their story ends. Eärendil is a mariner who lives in the havens of Sirion. It's this river mouth um, that leads into the sea. And he has two sons, Elrond and Elros, and they're very young. And he goes out to sea to find out what happened to Tuor. It's written a couple different ways, but then he's just out there for a really long time. And while he is gone, we have I'm just talking about an overview of the story of what is written in the Silmarillion at this point. So,
Yeah.
um, he has, and his wife, Elwain, is also a really important part of his story. She is the granddaughter of Beren and Luthien. Her father was a half-Elven being named Dior, and because of Beren and Luthien's story, I don't know how much everyone will be familiar with it, but Beren, in order to get Luthien's dad's approval to wed her, or maybe wed her, depending on the version that you're talking about, he has to go to the Dark Lord's crown and carve out this Silmaril. And the Silmarils are important because they hold, like, they encase the light of the two trees of Valinor, which, like, those trees lit up all of Valinor before they were destroyed. But their last leaf and their last flower became the sun and the moon. So they are really, really bright lights and beautiful. So Beren goes to Morgoth's crown and he cuts out this Silmaril, and then it is now his son's inheritance, Dior's inheritance, and then thus Elwing's inheritance. So while the havens of Sirion are being attacked and Eärendil is off at sea, um, the people who are attacking the havens are trying to get the Silmaril. That is their one goal. Elwing, who is the guardian of that, her knowing that her sons have actually already been taken captive, and she believes she will probably already never see them again. And she's quite outnumbered. She goes into the sea with the Silmaril, and that I'm not sure if she knew about the end, like the prophecy of where the Silmarils would be turned up from the sky, the sea, and like the deep of the earth. But if she didn't know, that might have been the reason she went into the sea with them. Or maybe it's just because that was the only place left. Either way, Ulmo, again, he has such a huge part in so many people's stories in Middle-earth. He turns her into a white bird, and she is able to fly towards Eärendil on his ship with the Silmaril. And now they're together, and she relates everything that has happened back at home with him. And they kind of have this conversation, and they're like, well, we're already this far, and we have this thing, and the people who are seeking the Silmaril are not going to stop at anything because they have sworn an oath on it, and it's already caused so much harm that would already be unspeakable. Elves slaying other elves was a massive rift in how in the created order. So they decide to sail to Valinor, and then there they get to talk to the Valar judges, and they decide that Eärendil has a choice to live forever as an elf, as could be his heritage, or as a man. And his wife chooses first. Because her grandmother never got to live out her full days as an elf because she chose to marry a mortal man. She chose to live, Elmi chose to live as an elf for the rest of her days for her grandmother's sake. And Eärendil, loving his wife, even though he would have rather chosen to live as a man, decided to live as an elf also. So now he still has this responsibility of the Silmaril forever. And what the Valar decide to give to him as his eternal task, almost eternal task, is to sail in the heavens with the Silmaril as a star that, and it's a star that has a light as bright as the sun and the moon. It's just a lot smaller. So that's also a really cool thing that I was thinking about. It's so visible to everyone on Middle-earth.
Very, yeah, fascinating. You are deeply knowledgeable, and I am grateful for you sharing all of that. Um, how do you now, if you could, connect us to his role and that connection to Middle Earth? And maybe that's where you were headed before I cut you off. So I apologize if that's the case. But nonetheless, please enlighten me.
So Eärendil's role in Middle-earth, when you first read about it in Lord of the Rings, or if you are familiar with the Peter Jackson films again, um, you will see him as a star in the movies for sure and the books. But he's also in another mentioned in a small other portion in the books. But in the movies, there's a circumstance where Frodo goes to Lothlorien and sees Galadriel. Galadriel is actually one of the only living elves on still in Middle Earth who remembers Valinor. She was there for the creation of the Silmarils. She had seen them before. She had participated in a lot of the events in the Silmarillion and would have been really familiar with, well, she was familiar with Luthien's story because she lived for a time in that same wood where Luthien grew up as a servant of Luthien's mother, as long as I'm not getting that mixed up, but I'm pretty sure they were in the same place for a long time. You can correct me though. And she understands the impact of this light and what the Silmaril means. She gives this light to Frodo because she also understands firsthand the darkness that he has already encountered, but is going to walk deeper and deeper into as he continues on his quest. So he kind of says these words that is sent in Elvish that essentially mean "Hail Eärendil, brightest star." So, which is based on a line that Tolkien read in an Anglo-Saxon poem about the Christ. It's a beautiful poem. I think that is really cool because that was the first. That's Eärendil. It can be argued is the first character that Tolkien developed and was continually thinking about in his legendarium because of that poem. And he loved the way the word Eärendil, I think, something like that sounded. Anyway, so in Lord of the Rings,
Yeah, I can appreciate that by Mr. Philologist.
right? So in Lord of the Rings, Frodo is given this light, and then he gets to call upon the light. Just symbolically, the light is a light. He doesn't actually do anything by hailing Eärendil in it, but that is the relevant link to the movies, and it does make a significant difference in the darkness that he faces there. So before that, you see Eärendil mentioned in the House of Elrond, and Bilbo has been there for some time. He's old, and he gets to live this lax life filled with song and verse and food and perfect for a hobbit like him. But he has this scheme where he is trying to make this this new song or poem sort of thing in the house of Elrond and impress the elves with it. And he thinks it's, it's kind of a game, but it's also a little bit for his own pride too, because where would we be without some pride? Well, probably be better. But the elves, when they hear it, and then he writes this whole long song about Eärendil, which is beautiful. And that describes his whole journey and what he sees on the seas. And then the elves make fun of him and they're like, wow, you would dare to make a song about Eärendil in his own son's house. And he seems, my impression of Eärendil is that from Lord of the Rings only, is that he's kind of encased in memory, along with a lot of other things that you see in the elves, like where they live. You have the three rings. They're always talking about how they're restoring what once was. You have Lothlorien, where this kind of, and Rivendell are both these sanctuaries where you're always honoring the past. And when you see that in other areas in Middle-earth, for instance, we can take again Gondor and Gondolin and the kings of Numenor. Gandalf kind of talks about this a little bit, as does Tolkien himself a little bit, but it's really easy to recall them films. When Gandalf is talking about the kings of Gondor and the last kings of Numenor, when they start to value their memory and history so much that their whole sight and their whole effort is turned back there instead of moving forward, and into new discovery, into new wisdom, or deeper wisdom, and a deeper understanding of the truth. But yeah, for the elves, yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it just strikes me as a bit ironic, given that I think Tolkien, by all accounts, would be someone who was desperately driven to capture the memory and the longing for a different time.
Right.
I mean, is that not the case?
I think it completely is.
So is he offering a bit of critique there, or is he lauding that uh, sentiment?
I think there might be a bit of both, because I think what the elves do really well, as in the case of Eärendil, that the men cannot do. Maybe it's just the nature of the elves, how they know that they are going to live longer. They are meant to. They are meant for eternity, and men are not. Um, and men kind of want that. The elves know how the things of the past influence the things of the future, and they know how that the beauty from the past and their experience informs their present and their future. They aren't looking back so much that they are kind of um, kind of decaying as the men are. Like their time in Middle Earth is coming to an end in the Third Age, but that is part of like the plan. So that I don't think.
Well, it's interesting too, then, because I think then in certain respects, for us as humans, as mortals, memory would be that faculty that reflects the eternal or the immortal, because it is their ability to recall sort of the glory days. I mean, all of us who have had significant highlight moments in our life, whether it's winning a competition in school or playing a sport or writing a book or whatever, right? There's the moment of recall and the associated emotion with that is a way of preserving that youthfulness, that vitality, and I guess in some respects just a taste of that immortality.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's all. Just Derek's musings on what you're talking about.
No, I was thinking the same thing. And are we thinking the same thing? In Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't like an element that I was like, are we contradicting each other? I'm pretty sure. I'm
I
pretty sure
I think we're in agreement.
yeah. Yeah, that's so cool, which I think also ties into Eärendil's nature as half-Elven and half man. Um, which I was thinking about that a little bit, and I was, of course, thought of Jesus, how he was, but he was fully divine and fully man. And Eärendil had this, and okay, Jesus had this responsibility, this task to carry that only he could, because he was fully man and fully divine, but he laid it aside. So
Perhaps.
yeah, what?
Well, I mean that we have quite a tangent there,
Oh, I
theologically. But
yeah, that's
I'll just say
okay. Well,
I'll,
sort of.
no, it's okay. It's okay for us to have a different take on it. But I'll just briefly say that's the reason why in the telling of all mythologies, the demigods are so important, right? Because they have that ability to sympathize and empathize with the mortals, but also recognize the power. And the distinction I would make with respect to the man Jesus, as you and I believe, is that he not only was fully God and fully man, right? So in many ways, it's metaphysically impossible for him to be fully God and to not be God, right? Like the whole idea of him setting aside divine rights. We can talk about that in another episode, but I don't think that it's actually feasible if we're going to claim one thing and then say he disregarded it in a way. However, that point aside, it is his perfecting of humanity in the divine will that gives us all the hope that we have and is what all of those characters are attempting to inspire and express in the human heart. As we know, things of this nature are written on the soul and the heart of humans from the beginning. That as the apostle Paul writes, now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. There is this singular example and reality in the person of Jesus that is how we know that for all of us it is something that is ultimately possible and will be in eternity. So that's all.
No, that's awesome. That's so true.
So he's Eärendil is this again. Those characters are so important, Taylor, and they're not just in Tolkien's, but as you say, Tolkien's distinction in the where he's coming from as the sub creator, to use his term of Middle Earth, is so significant that these characters be prominent and remembered. And sorry, I cut you off and went on a little theological tangent, but please
Well, that's
continue with
so
your
good. That's
thought.
the whole point, right? Yeah. And I was looking at Eärendil as with that dual nature. He gets to be a mediator between the Valar and his people back in Middle Earth. And because of that, his Silmaril gets to be an actual symbol of hope for all. And and the elves back in Middle Earth who were preparing to have this final battle against the current Dark Lord, they got to look at that star because of his mediation and understand that the Valar were on their side, that they hadn't been abandoned by that divine power.
That's great. Can you I, we've got just about 10 minutes left. Um, can you tell me a little bit about the Cimmeril and whatever you'd like to reflect upon with respect to both as a symbol but also as an actuality within the reality of the story?
Oh man. Okay, so the Silmaril as Eärendil star. Are you talking about the Silmaril specifically or all of them?
Both. I always talk about both.
Okay. So this Silmaril specifically. as a star. It is referred to as Gil Estel, the star of high hope, which is wonderful. And that word Estelle, as I think might have been mentioned in another episode, is what Aragorn's father called him, which is another link because there's the whole Elisar thing, and that was given to Eärendil as well. And there was another Elisar stone that was given to Aragorn because they were both meant to heal their areas of dominion. So the Silmaril, though, we already talked about the light, where it came from, the two trees. And honestly, I think, well, we talked about how it's the morning star. Where exactly, do you have any other specific questions? Because I feel like what my answer would be would go back a lot on what I've already said, so I don't want to
Okay.
a lot.
Well,
Lost you.
then yeah, then maybe just the Cimmerils generally, and then my next question will be if you think there is almost like Arundel's journey story arc is a microcosm of Middle Earth's story arc.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yes, that's so fair. Okay. So the Silmarils, they reflect something that has been from the very beginning. This symbol of, and also literal, light and goodness, and this kind of flourishing in an original paradise. And then the trees were destroyed, and that was lost. The Silmarils are, by definition and memory, a tangible memory of the original goodness and purpose. I think that also informs the identity of the world because the darkness is always coming after identity and purpose of the good, right? So, yeah. So the Silmarils continue to be this symbol, and then Eärendil gets to wield it forever. That's the only Silmaril that we get to see. The other two are in the sea and in the depths of the earth. And then after that, there is a prophecy that at the end of the world, all of the Silmarils will be turned up, and you'll know that the end is actually coming. But the elves should already all be in Valinor and then are meant to die. That's a terrible sounding ending, but it's a right ending. The men have their own place to go, so it's okay.
Right. Right. Well, do you have any thoughts? Go ahead.
Okay, so I think in the whole story, in Tolkien's whole legendarium, Eärendil his story kind of takes place, at the end of the first age, going into the second age. His line, his seed, began this whole other Numenorean nation. From him came Elrond, Arwen, Aragorn, Elendil, and Isildur, um, without Eärendil. And and like his nature, who he was, there would be no story as we know it. Um, he not only provided hope in the way of the Silmaril for many different peoples in many different situations, but also I think it's amazing that his legacy um, and his lineage also brought about so much healing to the world in other ways, and it always connected back to the divine, to help from the elves, to and kind of honoring that memory, that religion. Tolkien also wrote that the Numenoreans' kind of theology was really Hebraic, like they had this inheritance and they had this focus, but it was all to bring healing and restoration ultimately, which is also another prophecy that was said at the Eärendil and Aragorn both.
Awesome. Taylor, you're fantastic. Um, I really appreciate all of your insight. I would love to know if you have thoughts, just generally, any other elements that we didn't get to, and then lastly, your encouragement to those who have not yet started to read Tolkien? Why should they?
Mhm. Awesome. I think we hit a lot of the topics that I had thought about. I think there's always more to talk about with the sea, kind of that portal between the mortal and temporary and then the eternal and divine, um, which is really cool. But that Eärendil had to cross to get to his mediating agency. But I think a good encouragement to people who haven't read Tolkien. Oh my goodness. There are so many different ways to start. He has poetry. He's written so many epic poems, if you like that sort of thing. The Tale of Beren and Luthien is wonderful, or The Lay of Luthien. It's a great book. But if you are looking for something that has depth, where there is reflection in and intentionality in all of these different cultures, it ultimately reflects what Tolkien believed was the ultimate truth, goodness, and beauty of his created world, of the created world that he lived in. And he included that in so many different characters and so many different symbols. And I think it's beautiful to view a piece of art that had the intention of honoring what he knew to be true. And yeah, and that is also a reflection of all of the unfortunately tragic and evil reality, but still the triumph of good in that, because Tolkien was no stranger to that by any means, but he was able to still see the other side of it completely and weave that in, and you just see how everything works together for this catastrophe, which is beautiful. And it is, even though Lord of the Rings is such a small piece of it, and we talk about Lord of the Rings and the catastrophe in Lord of the Rings, but really it is the whole redemption of Middle Earth, as the way I see it.
That's beautiful. Taylor Crandall, I'm so grateful that you were willing to enlighten me with Eärendil's star, and may we all remember that light will always overcome the darkness, no matter how dark it appears. I'm so glad you joined me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek, for having this conversation. It was so much fun. I really, really appreciate it.
Yay! Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by the poem Sea Fever by John Masefield. Many thanks to Taylor Crandall for reading this poem.
He said, I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by, and the wheels kick and the wind song and the white sails shaking, and a gray mist on the sea's face, and a gray dawn breaking. I must go down to the seas again, for the call of the running tide is a wild call and a clear call that may not be denied. And all I ask is a windy day with the white clouds flying, and the flung spray and the blown spume and the seagulls crying. I must go down to the seas again, the vagrant gypsy life, to the gull's way and the whale's way where the wind is like a whetted knife. And all I ask is a merry yarn from a laughing fellow rover, and a quiet sleep and a sweet dream when the long trip's over.
That was Taylor Crandall reading Sea Fever by John Masefield. Thank you, Sea Fever, for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.